All right, you guys are good to go. The all lost time is 2.5 hours from right now. So if my math is correct, that should be 12:45, 12:46. So, and have at it.
Are we good from a conflicts perspective?
Yes, as
We're
far
good to start. Okay.
as far as I know. Let me real quick. Yeah, actually, let's say all lost time is 12:46. I'm gonna make you the host again once more. All right. All right, you guys are good to go. 12:46.
Awesome. All right. I see we have people from the plaintiff and defense team here. Is everyone from each of your teams here?
I believe so, Your Honor.
I believe so as well, Your Honor.
Okay, awesome. Well, then let's go ahead and get started. It's my understanding that there's no pretrial or motions in limine at this competition, but if there's something you'd like to raise with me, now's the time.
Just a few pretrial matters quickly, if that's okay, Your Honor.
I have no problem with that. Go ahead.
First, if I could make appearances before the court.
Sure.
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Tom Mulvey, and I'm joined this morning by my co-counsels, Miss Emma Callahan.
Morning, Your Honor.
Morning.
As well as Miss Lauren Ellens.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
And together we represent the plaintiff in today's case.
Okay.
There are just a few rules and stipulations I'd like to draw the court's attention to before we begin this morning. The first is Rule 603, which instructs that witnesses are constructively sworn in before today's trial.
Okay. Defense, any
second-
objections to that?
No objections, Your Honor.
Okay.
The second, Rule 615, which just assumes that witnesses are constructively sequestered.
Do you have any party representatives who are going to be in court today with you?
Not in court, no, Your Honor.
Okay. What about from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. Austin Lewis will be our party representative today.
Okay. I assume that he is the defendant.
She, Your Honor, but yes.
She, excuse me. All right. Anything further from the plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor. Just drawing the court's attention to a few stipulations. The first
Sure.
stipulations 3 and 4, which assume that exhibits 1 through 11 are pre-admitted.
What I see. Oh, I see. So 3 is 1 through 10 and 4 is for 11.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Defense, do you agree with that categorization of stipulations 3 and 4?
That's how we understand it as well, Your Honor.
Okay.
And finally, just stipulation 9, which says that all food and drink from the rehearsal dinner were tested the day after, and none of them were found to contain pesticides.
Okay. Defense, is that your understanding as well?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
And with that, the plaintiff is ready to proceed, Your Honor.
Okay. Any housekeeping from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. Just a few more pretrial matters. Permission to make appearances before the court.
Absolutely.
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Cooper Attig, and I, along with my co-counsel, Micah Porter.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
And Lillian Giles
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
will be representing the defendant in today's case, Peony Estates. Now, Your Honor, I'd like to tender the notice of intent to offer character evidence at this time.
Okay.
Both parties have seen this form and have signed it. Permission to screen share the form briefly?
Yes, absolutely.
Notice of intent, and both parties, as I said, signed and seen this document.
Okay. Thanks for showing me.
And then also, Your Honor, I'd like to point you the pretrial order for the battery case today. Permission to screen share that pretrial order.
Sure.
Now, Your Honor, I just want to point you to the second part of this pretrial order that states that both parties have jointly moved to bifurcate the trial. Therefore, today we only be dealing with liability and not damages.
Okay. Noted.
And with that, the defense is also ready to move to openings.
Okay. Awesome. Plaintiff, you may begin your opening whenever you're ready.
May I just jump in for 2 seconds and make sure we
Sure.
are pursuing negligence, not battery?
Okay.
That it was battery was just thrown out there. We are pursuing negligence, Your Honor.
Okay. Thank
My
you for making me aware of that. Are you ready to proceed with openings?
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you.
Okay. Whenever you're ready.
Can you see and hear me all right, Your Honor?
Yes, I can.
Your Honor, counsel, members of the jury, the poison was in the bottle and in the blood. On June 7th of 2019, Casey Soto was preparing to marry the love of her life, Genesis Petrillo. On that evening, Casey and Genesis hosted a rehearsal dinner at Peony Estates, a vineyard here in Midlands, owned by Casey's mom, Harper Martini. On that night, Harper Martini gave Genesis Petrillo a special gift, a unique bottle of 2019 Cara wine. In fact, the first and only bottle of 2019 Cara wine that Peony Estates had ever created. So of course, Genesis opened this bottle, and of course Genesis drank it. But members of the jury, only a few hours later, Genesis was dead. Genesis had died of pesticide poisoning. Throughout this trial, we'll show you that those pesticides were in the bottle and were in the blood. My name is Emma Callahan. Together with my co-counsel, Tom Mulvey and Lauren Ellens, we represent the estate of the deceased, Genesis Petrillo. Today, we will be pursuing a claim of negligence per se against Peony Estates for the role that they played in Genesis Petrillo's death. Now, what that means is that we have to prove to you two things beyond a preponderance of the evidence, or slightly more likely than not. First, that Peony Estates violated Midland's codes by improperly storing their pesticides. And second, that this violation led to the death of Genesis Petrillo. Now, members of the jury, we will meet that burden today. We will meet that burden by presenting evidence to you about the bottle from which Genesis Petrillo drank and about Genesis Petrillo's blood in the moments before his death. First, you'll hear about that bottle from Casey Soto, the daughter of Peony Estates' owner, Harper Martini, and the would-be wife of Genesis Petrillo. Ms. Soto will tell you about the winemaking process at Peony Estates. And she'll also tell you about the problems with pesticides that her mother was having right around the time that Peony Estates was bottling that 2019 Cara wine. Next, you'll hear from Riley Adkins O'Keefe, a health inspector here in Midlands, who will give you the details of Peony Estates' improper pesticide practices. Mr. O'Keefe inspected Peony Estates on May 8th of 2019. What he found on that day terrified him. He found large canisters of pesticides in the exact same area that Peony Estates bottles its wine. Mr. O'Keefe will also tell you that he found a report about Peony Estates' 2019 Cara wine after Genesis Petrillo had drank this wine. He'll tell you that this report proves that that bottle of wine had nearly twice the legal limit of poisonous pesticide. And finally, you'll hear about Genesis Petrillo's blood from Dr. Jimin Kwan, Genesis' treating physician and a toxicologist who specializes in poisons like the one that Peony Estates uses at their winery. Now, Dr. Kwan will give you information about the tests that she performed on Genesis Petrillo's blood. Now, these tests showed that Petrillo's blood was positive for organophosphate pesticides, the same pesticide that Peony Estates uses at its winery and that was found in Genesis Petrillo's blood. Now, Dr. Kwan will also tell you about something that was missing from Genesis Petrillo's blood, an enzyme called acetylcholinesterase. Dr. Kwan will tell you what a lack of this enzyme means and how this fact, along with the others that she found, allowed her to conclude with medical certainty that Genesis Petrillo died of pesticide poisoning. Members of the jury, at the close of evidence today, you will see that the poison was in the bottle and was in the blood. This is why when my co-counsel Lauren Ellens comes before you, she will ask that you find Peony Estates liable for negligence per se for poisoning Genesis Petrillo. Thank you.
Thank you. Opening for the plaintiff. Do we have an opening for the defense?
Yes, Your Honor.
Proceed whenever you're ready.
May it please the court. It is June 7th, 2019. Genesis Petrillo is getting ready for his wedding the next day. There has just been a celebratory dinner at Peony Estates. Petrillo's mother-in-law gives him a unique bottle of wine. It has certainly been a special evening. In order to celebrate, Genesis stays up drinking with his friend, Angel Rodriguez. But then things take a turn for the worse. Genesis gets sick, really sick, and has to be taken to the hospital. The doctors do all they can, but unfortunately, Genesis passes away. What you will learn today, members of the jury, is that we do not know why. There are simply too many unanswered questions. But the plaintiff is here today blaming Peony Estates. The plaintiff has filed a claim of negligence. But in order for them to meet this burden, the plaintiff must first prove that Peony violated a statute, and second, that because they violated this statute, Genesis was harmed. The plaintiff must meet this burden by a preponderance of the evidence. In other words, in order to find Peony Estates liable, the plaintiff must show that they more likely than not violated the statute. They will fail to meet this burden because there are too many unanswered questions. Today, we will call 3 witnesses to show you all of these questions that the plaintiff cannot answer. First, Dr. R. Cannon, a medical doctor with expertise in toxicology and pharmacology, will take the stand. He will show you just how many unanswered questions there really are, and he will tell you that, put simply, it is impossible to know what caused Genesis Petrillo's death. He will show you the evidence that the plaintiff has ignored. Second, you will hear from Blair Osborne, the wedding planner for Genesis and Casey's wedding. She will tell you how she has worked with Peony Estates for many years and has never experienced any issues in all of her time working at Peony Estates. And third, you will hear from Austin Lewis, an employee of Peony Estates. She will detail for you how Peony was admittedly struggling with pesticide issues, but they stored their pesticides responsibly and took many careful measures to ensure that no one was harmed. By the end of this trial, it will be clear. There are simply too many questions that the plaintiff cannot answer. That is why we will ask you to find Peony Estates not liable. Thank you, Your Honor.
Awesome, thank you. I believe we next will go to the case in chief from the plaintiff.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff calls Casey Soto to the stand.
And pursuant to Rule 603, this witness will be presumed pre-sworn. You may begin whenever.
Ms. Soto, could you please introduce yourself to the court?
My name's Casey Soto.
Before we get started today, let's make something clear for the jury. Are you testifying voluntarily?
No, I'm not.
Okay, why didn't you want to testify today?
I just don't want to keep talking about this. After everything I've been through, of course I get subpoenaed to sit here and answer your questions.
I understand, Ms. Soto, but I'm afraid we do need to get into it a little bit today. What do you mean, everything you've been through?
All right, well, my mom, Harper Martini, owns this winery, Peony Estates, and she basically convinced me to have my wedding there. But on the morning of my wedding, my fiance, Genesis, died of pesticide poisoning. So here I am.
I'm sorry, Ms. Soto. Before we get to talking about Genesis, let's go back to Peony Estates. Do you have any experience there?
Yeah, I do. Every summer, I worked at Peony Estates harvesting that stupid wine. So you think that if there was going to be some disaster with that wine, it could have been then, not the one time I was the customer.
Do you know anything about the winemaking process itself at Peony Estates?
I do. Peony Estates is a small vineyard, and we just grow one type of grape, which we would harvest one year and bottle the next.
Thank you, Ms. Soto. Let's switch gears a little bit, if that's all right with you. Could you tell us a bit about Genesis Petrillo?
Yeah, Genesis was my fiance. After spending 8 years with him, we finally had our wedding scheduled for June 8th of 2019.
Could you tell us a bit about the lead up to that wedding?
It was going to be beautiful, my fairy tale wedding, but I didn't even want to have it at Peony Estates to begin with because there was this leak in the storage barn and they had to move everything from the bottling area. We could have had it at the winery we got engaged at Rosie and Pedro, but the cheaper option was definitely at Peony Estates. My mom offered to pay for most of it.
Objection, Your Honor. Lack of personal knowledge.
Okay, can you explain a little further?
Yes, Your Honor. The witnesses testified that there was a leak that Peony Estates had to take care of during the time leading up to the wedding. We've not heard enough foundation as to how the witness knew about this leak, how they were informed about it, and therefore there's no foundation, hasn't been enough foundation laid yet.
All right, plaintiff, do you wish to respond?
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Soto has established the fact that she worked at Peony Estates, that she has a relationship with her mother, who is the owner of Peony Estates. It's certainly within her reasonably based perception that she understands what's going on at Peony Estates at any given time.
I tend to agree. I think there's been enough foundation laid just because of the fact that she was planning a wedding there, and it sounds like her mother was in charge of the venue. Defense counsel, you're certainly welcome to go into this on cross-examination, but I'm also going to overrule the objection because I think it's a little untimely. That was, I think, 2 questions ago at this point. So overruled for now, but re-raise it if it becomes a problem again.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Soto, let's move on. Could you tell us a little bit about your rehearsal dinner?
Yeah, I mean, everything was going well. Everyone loved my dress, my shoes, my hair. But then the attention shifted when Mom gave Genesis this special bottle of wine, and then nobody was really paying attention to me after that.
What bottle of wine was that, Ms. Soto?
Okay, wait, let me get something clear. I'm not upset that my mom made Genesis the center of attention, but Mom made this huge deal about it, showing off the label to everybody. It was called Cara. It means darling in Italian. So,
Objection. Relevance may be heard on those grounds.
Sure.
Your Honor, today we are solely dealing with negligence per se and not battery. The fact that Harper Martini gave a bottle of wine to Genesis specifically deals with an act that would fall under dealing with battery, but we are not dealing with battery in today's case. We're dealing with negligence per se. Therefore, this is not relevant.
Well, it's my understanding that that was the alleged negligent act that caused his death. You wish to clarify that for me?
Yes, Your Honor. The alleged negligent act was the contamination of the wine by Peony Estates, not specifically Harper Martini giving any bottle or any other sort of act like that to Genesis Petrillo. Therefore, this was not relevant.
And plaintiff, what's the relevance of this? Certainly.
Your Honor, we haven't said specifically at what point those pesticides got in the wine. It's perfectly plausible that Harper Martini had pesticides on her hand when she handed this bottle of wine to Ms. Soto. We want to make sure that the story is set, that every piece of evidence regarding that bottle of wine is in testimony today.
I tend to agree. I think the bar for relevance is generally pretty low in cases like this. I'm going to allow the plaintiff to go into this for now, but if it becomes clear that she is pursuing a line of questioning that leads towards battery, please re-raise your objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Soto, back to the Cara wine. Do you know anything else about that bottle?
of course I know about that stupid bottle of wine. I knew that it was the only bottle of Cara that my mom had processed so far. She told me that they wouldn't be bottling the wine until later in June after the wedding. So, I mean, I was a little confused on why it was even there in the first place.
Would you recognize the label from that bottle today?
How could I forget it?
Your Honor, permission to display Exhibit 2B, which has been pre-admitted per Stipulation 3, that label from the bottle of Cara wine.
Any objections from the defense?
No objections, Your Honor.
Please go with it.
Ms. Soto, could you tell us what this is?
The label off the bottle of wine, it says Cara right there.
Thank you, Ms. Soto. We'll be taking that down now. Now, Ms. Soto, what happened after Genesis drank wine from that bottle?
Do you really need me to tell you this? My fiance died. There was no wedding. There was no honeymoon. The death certificate says it was pesticides from that special bottle of wine that just happened to ruin the rest of my life.
Objection, Your Honor. Improper lay opinion may be heard on those grounds.
Please.
The witness just stated that what happened directly after drinking that bottle of wine was that Genesis Petrillo died. The witness has no way to conclude this or make an opinion on that matter. In today's case, she can simply describe what she observed afterwards, not the actual cause and effect. Therefore, this is an improper lay opinion.
Okay. Plaintiff, how do you respond?
Your Honor, I believe that Ms. Soto said that Genesis drank the wine and Genesis died. She also referenced the death certificate, which does say that the pesticides were the cause of death. So it's perfectly within her understanding of what happened to say those things.
Okay. Unfortunately, we don't have a court reporter here, but it's my recollection that she said that the wine was the cause of death. So what I'm going to do is we're going to strike that question. If you'd like to go back and re-ask the question in a permissible way, feel free to do so, but the objection is sustained.
Yes, Your Honor. Move to strike the testimony so far regarding the bottle of wine.
The last question and answer will be stricken.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Soto, what happened after that rehearsal dinner?
I mean, like I said, the next day my fiance was dead. There was no wedding, no honeymoon. And the death certificate I received said pesticides were a cause of death. And the only thing that Genesis drank that I didn't drink that night was the bottle of Cara.
Your Honor, permission to display Exhibit 7, the death certificate of Genesis Petrillo, which has also been pre-admitted.
Any objections from the defense?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, please.
Ms. Soto, is this the death certificate that you're referencing?
It is.
And what did you learn from this document?
Under that part that says describe how injury occurred, it says that the most likely source of poisoning is the wine that the patient ingested with dinner. And basically, I mean, it's just saying that they found pesticides. And another report even says that they found pesticides in his blood and in his stomach.
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay may be heard on those grounds.
Please.
The witness just stated that another report said that Genesis Petrillo was found to have pesticides in her blood and in her stomach. She's referencing a report that's not in evidence and has informing her testimony through hearsay in another report. Therefore, this is not admissible.
I tend to agree. Plaintiff's counsel, how do you respond?
Your Honor, the other report that she's referencing is pre-admitted in evidence. It is Exhibit 6. I would also like to point out that per 8033, medical diagnoses are an exception to hearsay. So Ms. Soto would be allowed to put this into testimony.
That is correct. And so if it's already into evidence, it wouldn't technically be hearsay, but I do think that it's confusing to the jury to talk about a separate report while you also have the death certificate up. So if you would just break that line of questioning up, just to make it clear for the jury. I'll sustain the objection for now, but I think that the testimony can't come in.
Yes, Your Honor. My co-counsel will be taking that exhibit down now. Thank you. So Ms. Soto, was there anything else that suggested to you that about Genesis Petrillo's death and how he died?
Objection, leading question.
Overruled.
Yeah. Sorry. There was this toxicology report I received that said that they found they found pesticides in his blood and in his stomach.
Your Honor, at this point, may we display Exhibit 6, that toxicology report on the screen?
Any objections from the defense?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, go ahead.
Ms. Soto, what did you learn from this report?
It says right there that organophosphate pesticide was found in his stomach and in his blood. You can read it right there.
Thank you, Ms. Soto. My co-counsel will be taking that exhibit down now. Ms. Soto, I'm sorry to have to ask you this, but in the days leading up to that rehearsal dinner, did you ever hear anyone at the Vineyard talk about issues with pesticide?
Yeah, I did.
Can you tell us what they said?
My mom told me that the winery had just failed an inspection because of the way it had been handling pesticides. It just sounded so unsafe.
And when was that conversation?
It was just a couple of weeks before my wedding, so probably around May 17th or 18th of last year.
So let's be clear about one last thing. Do you happen to know when that car of wine was bottled?
Yeah, I mean, it was around the same time my mom was freaking out about those pesticides. Again, May 17th or 18th, while I was trying to focus on the most important day of my life. They weren't supposed to bottle all the car until after my wedding.
Thank you, Ms. Soto. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right. Mr. Addig, do you wish to cross-examine?
Yes, Your Honor.
Proceed when you're ready.
Thank you. Ms. Soto, I know this can be difficult for you, so please let me know if you need a moment during my line of questioning. Now, to be clear, you don't want to be here testifying today, do you?
I really don't.
You're not here testifying voluntarily?
I've been subpoenaed. That means I have to be here.
That's right. You were subpoenaed by the defense to testify today in court. Isn't that true?
It is.
Now, Harper raised you alone as a mother. Isn't that true?
Yeah, she did.
And she was always there for you. Isn't that true?
She was.
And she always seemed to have the best intentions.
Objection, Your Honor, to relevance may be heard.
Briefly.
Your Honor, the defense is trying to assert that Casey and her mother were close. This is a line in pursuance to battery, stating that her mother cared much about Casey Soto herself. It isn't on the ballot today for negligence.
I understand that this is a negligence case, but I think this is proper for the defense counsel to go into on cross-examination just to lay some background. But if he does start asking questions that are more specifically to what the mother's conduct was in a way that would imply battery, please raise your objection, but for now it's overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Soto, I'll re-ask the question. Harper Martini, your mom, was always well-intentioned. Isn't that true?
I mean, to me, she was. She loves me.
And Harper always dreamed of having your wedding at Peony Estates. Isn't that correct?
I mean, what mom wouldn't want her daughter to have a wedding like at her favorite place?
So much so that she offered to pay for a majority of the wedding. Isn't that true?
Yes.
And Harper Martini was really involved in planning the wedding as well.
Yeah, it was almost overbearing.
And she was worried about every single detail leading up to the wedding. Isn't that true?
Well, I mean, that's what she told me.
And your mom wanted everything to be perfect, correct?
Again, I mean, it's her only daughter's wedding. Of course she would want it to be perfect.
Now, in the weeks leading up to the wedding, Harper also told you that Peony Estates had a small pesticide problem. Isn't that true?
It is.
But she told you these were just formalities and that she planned to fix them in the next few days. Isn't that correct?
What else would she tell a bridezilla? That they were going to spray pesticides all over her wedding venue?
So that's a yes to my question. She told you that these fixes were just formalities.
That's what she told me. I just have no other knowledge of what actually happened.
And these fixes including putting up signs. Isn't that true?
Yes.
And these signs reminded employees to wash their hands after they use a pesticide. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
And you actually saw these signs go up.
I did. I was at Peony Estates a lot.
And these were in visible places. Isn't that true?
I mean, I could see them.
That's right. They were put in visible spots throughout Peony Estates. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
Now, on the night that Genesis died, when you heard pesticide, you originally thought of Peony Estates. Isn't that true?
I did.
But After thinking through that, you concluded that that didn't make sense for Peony to be involved. Isn't that correct?
I mean, what could I say? I mean, it's my mom's winery. How could I blame it on my mom?
So that's a yes to my question. You concluded that it didn't make sense for Peony to be involved with the pesticide. Isn't that true?
It is.
Thank you, Ms. Soto. No further questions.
All right. Plaintiff, do you wish to redirect?
Briefly, Your Honor.
Please go ahead.
Now, Ms. Soto, just to clarify, when you heard that pesticides could have been involved in Genesis Petrillo's death, what did you immediately think of?
I mean, I immediately thought, since my mom had talked about the pest problem, that it might have been peony, but I mean, I didn't want to blame my mom. It's my mom's business.
Thank you, Ms. Soto. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right. Anything on recross? I'm not sure if recross is allowed in this venue.
It is, Your Honor, I believe. One question briefly.
Okay.
Ms. Soto, just to be clear for the jury, that you eventually concluded it didn't make sense for Peony Estates to be involved with the pesticide. Isn't that true?
Like I keep saying, I just don't want to blame my mom for any of this.
Thank you. No further questions.
All right. Can this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. And if you would give me just 2 seconds to update my ballot before we get to the next witness. All right. Plaintiff, are you ready to call your next witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Riley Adkins O'Keefe to the stand.
Mr. O'Keefe, I will remind you that you are pre-sworn pursuant to FRE 603. Mr. Mulvey, you can begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Could you please introduce yourself to the court?
Hi, my name is Riley Adkins O'Keefe.
And what do you do for a living, Mr. O'Keefe?
I'm a senior health and safety inspector for the Rapid River County Department of Health and Environmental Safety, which is also a designee of the Food and Drug Administration.
Now, what does it mean to be a designee of the FDA?
Well, it means that in addition to auditing compliance with local codes, we also audit for compliance with federal regulations for the FDA. But my main responsibility during inspections is always to audit for compliance with the local codes.
Now, what kind of work do you do for Rapid River County?
I mainly do winery inspections. I've done nearly 200 in the 8 years that I've been with DHES.
Do you have any education that prepared you for this line of work?
Yeah, I have a master's in viticulture and enology. So that's basically the study of winemaking, everything from cultivation to pest management to fermentation and bottling.
Now, Mr. O'Keefe, are you familiar with Peony Estates Winery?
Yes, I am. It's a winery here in Rapid River County. I've inspected them a number of times. My last visit, I believe, was on May 8th of 2019.
Do you recall what brought you there for your last visit?
Yes, I do. I was conducting an unscheduled follow-up based on some concerns I had about pesticide storage. FDA protocol generally requires a follow-up in these circumstances.
Now, how does pesticide storage fall under your scope as health inspector?
The use of pesticides at wineries always poses a risk of contamination of the wine, which of course in turn poses a health risk to the consumer.
Now, how did your May 8th, 2019 inspection begin?
Well, I met with the owner, Harper Martini. I told Martini I was following up on some of my earlier concerns about their pesticide storage and asked them to show me where the winery was currently storing its pesticides.
And where was the winery storing their pesticides?
Well, she took me to a storage shed. It looked fine. And I asked Martini if there were any other pesticides on the property, but she vehemently denied that there were.
And was that true?
No, it wasn't. There were pesticides elsewhere on the property.
Where else were these pesticides being stored?
Well, in the bottling area, there were 3 huge canisters of bug-off isofenfos pesticide present.
Is that an issue for you?
Yeah, of course, it was a major issue. The close proximity of these pesticides to machinery that processes open bottles of wine posed a serious risk of contamination, which in turn posed a serious risk to the health and safety of the consumer.
So what did you do after noticing these pesticides being stored so closely to the equipment?
Well, naturally, I began to ask employees who worked in the bottling area about their training for the handling of pesticides.
And how did they respond?
Well, they told me that they were confused about the safe handling of pesticides and that they didn't really know how important it was to keep these pesticides away from beverage production and processing areas. I mean, one employee, Kirby Doolittle, I believe, actually told me that Harper wanted them to keep the pesticides in the bottling area.
Now, does this lack of training concern you?
Yeah, of course. It was a huge concern to me. Proper training of employees on the safe handling of pesticides is critical to protect against contamination of food and beverage products by these pesticides.
Did you see any bottles of wine near these pesticides while you were at Peony Estates?
Yes, there was a single bottle of wine labeled Cara sitting right by itself next to the pesticide canisters.
Mr. O'Keefe, is it a problem that this single bottle of Caro was sitting with these pesticide canisters?
Yeah, absolutely. Storing pesticides right next to wine poses another serious risk of contamination, and of course is a clear health violation.
How is the keeping of pesticides near wine a health violation?
So you have to understand that pesticides can be used at a winery, right? That's not the issue. But pesticides have to be identified, held, and stored in a manner that protect against contamination. The key word here is and. All three of these conditions have to be met in order for a winery to be compliant.
And was Peony Estates compliant?
No. While Peony Estates had identified pesticides in that manner, the violation was that they were holding and storing pesticides in a manner that didn't protect against contamination.
How does contamination happen as a result of pesticides being in the bottling area?
The risk there is that the equipment in the bottling area will get contaminated with pesticides. Everything from the bottling equipment down to the countertops can get substantial amounts of pesticides on them if pesticides are present in the same area.
Do you know if wine at Peony Estates was ever contaminated?
Yes, we received a toxins analysis regarding a sample of wine that the police recovered at Peony Estates on June 9th of 2019.
And would you recognize a copy of that analysis if I were to show it to you today?
I would, yes.
Your Honor, permission to have my co-counsel display Exhibit 10 on the screen?
Yes, this has already been entered into evidence, right?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Unless there's any objections from the defense, you can go ahead and do that. Okay.
Now, Mr. O'Keefe, what does this report tell you about the wine?
Well, it shows that it contains toxic levels of isofenthos, which is a pesticide. And as you can see, there are 91 micrograms per liter, which is almost double the legal limit of 50. I mean, this is proof that the Cara bottle contained toxic levels of pesticide.
Thank you, Mr. O'Keefe. Your Honor, I have no further questions, and my co-counsel will be taking down the exhibit.
Okay. Defense, do you wish to cross-examine?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Mr. O'Keefe, you performed 4 inspections at Peony Estates ranging from 2015 to 2019. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct.
Please clarify then the dates and the ranging from when you actually investigated the estates.
Yeah, so I did 3 inspections of Peony Estates from 2015 to 2019. I believe my last visit was May 9th.
All right, so you would agree you're familiar with the layout and procedure of Peony Estates, right?
Generally, yeah, you could say that. Of course, I've only inspected them 3 times.
Let me understand that correctly. You said 3 times, correct?
I did inspect them 3 times, yes.
All right, well, it clearly states in the affidavit you had 4 investigations.
No, that's incorrect.
Objection, Your Honor, improper impeachment.
Okay.
Let me reference this really quickly.
Well, defense counsel, I will admonish you to follow the proper impeachment procedure. But if you have an impeachment, I'll let it go forward.
Just give me 1 second. Mhm. I'm having difficulty screen sharing, but
Is there a technical issue on my end that I should
within
fix?
the affidavit, it clearly states there were 4 investigations.
What we can do
Objection
is
once
you
again,
can.
Your Honor.
Okay. Pause for just a second. Because we're having technical issues, what I will ask you to do, Mr. Porter, is just direct court and counsel to a page and line number. I have a copy of the case documents here, so I can reference it.
Okay. Give me 1 second. I'm sorry.
No problem. I assume that this is going to be
Yes, just
from
look at
Dr.
page,
O'Keefe's report.
Yes, page 60 of the affidavit. It states the 4 investigations here. I'll
If I
give you
may,
the documents if you prefer.
Your
I'm
Honor,
sorry?
may I re-raise my objection and respond?
Sure.
Special instruction 7 concerning the availability of documents says that according to leg 2, the report of Riley Adkins O'Keefe dated May 30, 2019. If plaintiff chooses negligence per se, the deposition, excuse me. I may have the wrong special instruction, if you'll give me a moment.
Okay, I will give you a moment, but first, Mr. Porter, would you clarify what document you're referring to? I don't have it all together in a page, so I have document 3, Riley Adkins O'Keefe, and I see the inspection report. I see an FDA document.
Yes.
And his statement of findings.
This
Is that what you're
exactly
referring
the
to?
U.S. Food and Drug Administration documents. There is the dates on those are 11/05/2015, 7/12/2018, 5/8/2019, and 5/30/2019, indicating 4 investigations, not 3.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
If I were to finish that special instruction number 7, the report of Riley Adkins O'Keefe dated May 30, 2019, and as well as the deposition of Harper Martini are not part of the case and cannot be referenced during trial if we pursue negligence per se.
Okay, give me just a second to pull that up. You said that's special instruction number 7?
I believe so, Your Honor.
Okay. Give me 1 second. Okay, that looks like a correct reading of that special instruction, defendant or defense counsel, excuse me. Do you wish to respond?
I'd ask for clarification then on the investigations.
So as I see it, so I looked at the Mr. O'Keefe or Dr. O'Keefe, excuse me's documents, and I did see that there were 4 inspection documents there. However, special instruction 7 says the following documents are only available if plaintiff chooses battery, and one of them is the report dated May 30th, 2019.
I understand. May I continue?
Yes, but the limited amount of questions on the report on the impermissible report will be stricken.
And may I ask which investigation that was exactly? 1, 2, 3, or 4?
I don't know which order it was. It was the one dated May 30th, 2019.
Okay. Thank you. All right. In continuing, Mr. O'Keefe, upon your first investigation of the estates, the grounds were maintained in proper accordance with your state's guidelines, correct?
Yes, that's correct. I do recall a small problem with pesticide storage, but that's about it. Everything else was good.
And you spoke to several different individuals when conducting the investigation, right?
My 2015 investigation?
Yes.
Yes, I did. That's correct.
And one of these was Vineyard Manager Austin Lewis, right?
Yes, I did meet with Miss Lewis.
And Lewis mentioned to you that the vineyard's close proximity to Solof Swamp has led to a rise in pests. Is that right?
Yeah, and we generally see this sometimes when wineries are next to swamps, such as the Solov. They do tend to have more pest problems.
And despite this increase, you would agree that Peony Estates' use of pesticides was within guidelines?
Within guidelines, yes, but like I said, there was a small storage issue, but I believe they did correct that in 2015.
And you also spoke with Harper Martini in this investigation, correct?
I did speak with Martini, yes.
And that conversation was about improper pesticide storage, right?
Yes, as I said, they did have a small problem with pesticide storage in 2015.
And Harper responded by clarifying that this was placed there by accident.
Yes, I believe that was the case, correct.
And she went on to say that they were aware of proper pesticide procedure.
Objection, Your Honor, as to improper character evidence. May I be heard?
Sure.
Opposing counsel is using past actions of Peony Estates employees to insinuate that they would use the same actions in the future.
I don't believe that insinuation has been made yet. If it is ever made at any point, please re-raise your objection. But for now, I think that just going into the past inspections has some relevant value. And as of right now, it hasn't crossed the line into impermissible character evidence. So overruled for now.
Yes, Your Honor.
If I may continue. Mr. O'Keefe, your second investigation was spurred on by an anonymous tip-off, correct?
Yes, we had an anonymous tip through the United States Postal Service that there were some problems with pesticide storage at Peony Estates Winery, which of course we decided to follow up on just to make sure all regulations were being followed.
So when you arrived at Peony Estates for your second investigation, you instructed Martini to give you a thorough tour of the cellar, correct?
Absolutely, yes.
And upon this investigation of the cellar, you found a high number of pests.
Yeah, there were an unusually high number of pests in the cellar, that's correct.
But this number did not violate any health and safety standards, did it?
No, not by itself, it didn't.
And after the cellar, you spoke with Austin Lewis once again, correct?
Yes, I did speak with Miss Lewis.
And Lewis informed you that the facility at the far end of the vineyard is commonly used to store pesticides.
Yes, that's correct.
But many vineyard employees had been using a storage facility between the cellar and the vineyards for convenience, correct?
Right, so that one storage facility was clearly too far away from where the pesticides were actually needed to be used. So I do believe it was the case that many employees got lazy and improperly stored pesticides.
But this intermediary storage facility didn't violate any health or safety guidelines either, did it?
I don't believe it did, as long as it was 50 feet away.
And neither did the practice itself of how they were storing the pesticides in this intermediary facility.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that last question?
And neither did the practice itself of how they were storing the pesticides.
That's correct, that's correct.
I'd like to move on to your third investigation. On your third investigation of Peony, you found the cellar to be quite in order, correct?
The cellar?
Yes.
When you say cellar, are you referring to the bottling area?
No, I'm referring to the cellar where they stored the wine itself.
Okay, yeah, the cellar, I believe, was in order, yes.
And Martini showed you the newly constructed storage facility for pesticides.
That's correct, yes.
And this itself was an adequate distance from food and beverage production or storage area.
That's right, it was an adequate distance.
And it was during this investigation you took notice of a bottle of wine labeled Cara.
Yes, I did, that's correct. It was actually right next to 3 huge pesticide canisters, which of course is a clear health violation. I mean, if there's a clear risk of someone even touching those pesticide canisters, getting pesticides on their hands, and then going to do work in bottling, contaminating the wine. Extremely dangerous.
Still, this bottle was tightly sealed, correct?
I believe it was sealed. I'm not sure how tightly.
All right. And just because it was close to the pesticides, you briefly explained that there's a possibility of contamination from the hands, but just because it was close doesn't mean it was definitely contaminated, does it?
Well, that's correct, but generally we have health regulations there for a reason.
All right. And since this anonymous letter, have you received any other form of tip-off?
Since the letter in
The letter from the
2018?
Postal Service, yes.
Oh, no, not since the letter from the United States Postal Service.
All right. Well, are you sure about that? No other tip-offs of any kind?
I don't recall, but if you'd like to refresh my memory, you can.
Yes. So you didn't ever receive a phone call from Genesis indicating the nature of Peony Estates possibly being holding pesticides and contaminating their wine?
I don't recall, but as I said, if you'd like to refresh my memory, please
Your Honor, it
feel free
clearly
to do
states
so.
within the affidavit that Genesis placed a phone call before the time of her death, tipping off the
Objection once again, Your Honor, as to improper impeachment.
Sustained right now, but Mr. Porter, if you would like to direct the witness's attention to a specific portion of the case packet to refresh his memory, there will be no objections to that.
If you have the
Strike, Your Honor.
affidavit, it is on page the exact page number. I don't know how to screen share. I apologize about that.
That's fine. You don't have to screen share. like I said, I have the document. So if you
May I
want to just
read it?
direct me
Yes,
to a
yes.
portion and then read it into the record, feel free to.
So line 3 on the Declaration of Riley Atkins O'Keefe, the last page, it says, on June 1st, 2019, I received a call from Genesis Petrillo. Petrillo claimed to have evidence that Peony Estates has been involved in extensive health code violations and other serious infractions. This clearly states there was a second tip-off that the witness clearly dejected.
I'm sorry. Could you please clarify which document you were referring to again?
This is within the affidavit, the last page of the Declaration of Riley Atkins.
So just to be clear, this is, if I have this right, is the Declaration of Riley Atkins O'Keefe dated 9/8/2020.
Yes.
And it's basically an addendum to the
Yes, Your Honor.
deposition, as I understand it. Okay. You have drawn our attention to that point in the record. Mr. Mulvey, do you wish to re-raise an objection?
I do, yes, once again, to improper impeachment, as well as counselor testifying.
Okay. So I do not believe that this is in the record so far. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to strike any portion of this which has been read into the record. Mr. Porter, if you would like to draw Dr. O'Keefe's attention to this, give him time to read it, and then re-ask him a question about that,
Yes.
I will allow it to go forward under that procedure.
Mr. Atkins O'Keefe, would you like to read the portion of the affidavit in which it states that Genesis Petrillo placed a phone call to you on June 1st, 2019?
No, my memory has been refreshed. Thank you.
Thank you. No further questions.
Okay, do we need any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. I just ask that the witness be excused.
Dr. O'Keefe, you're excused. And plaintiff, you can call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff would call Dr. Kwan to the stand.
All right, Dr. Kwan, I will remind you that you have been pre-sworn, so everything you tell must be the truth today. Ms. Ellens, you may begin whenever you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Could you please introduce yourself to the court?
Hi, I'm Dr. Jay Kwan.
And what do you do for a living?
I'm the chief emergency physician at River Valley Hospital here in Midlands.
And what do you do as the chief emergency physician?
My job is to quickly and accurately diagnose patients as they enter the emergency room. Essentially, I look at symptoms, order tests, and then administer treatment.
Do you specialize in any particular area of medicine?
Yes, I specialize in toxicology. I've been awarded a fellowship in toxicology, which is a type of hyper-specialization in the medical field. And I also serve on the board of a toxicology-related advocacy organization.
Have you published in the field of toxicology?
Yes, I've published many works. My scholarly work mostly focuses on chemical pesticides and the risk they pose to humans and the environment.
So why are you here in court today, Dr. Kwan?
I was Petrillo's treating physician on the night of his death.
Could you tell us about your encounter with Genesis Petrillo?
I think the best way to explain the treatment of any patient is by thinking of it as an exercise in following the scientific method. First, you formulate a question, make observations, from there a hypothesis, then you collect data, make an analysis, and from there form a conclusion. Treating Petrillo was no different.
I'd like to break that down step by step. What was the question in the case of Genesis Petrillo?
The same as it is with every patient who is brought into the emergency room. What was wrong with him?
And what did you observe about Mr. Petrillo?
Some of the things I observed were symptoms such as nausea, vomiting, stomach cramps, chest pain, severely contracted pupils, muscle twitching, trouble breathing, excessive tearing, incontinence, and a slowed pulse.
So based on these observations, did you form any hypothesis?
Yes, I actually formed two.
Could you take us through your first hypothesis, Dr. Kwan?
Yes, my first hypothesis was that Mr. Petrillo was suffering from alcohol poisoning because it was clear that he had been drinking. He smelled of wine.
Objection, Your Honor.
What's the
They
basis?
did not. They did not establish that the method was reliable.
Okay. And it's your position, defense counsel, that this is an expert opinion?
Yes, it is.
Okay. I tend to agree that it's an expert opinion. And according to Rule 702, or it's either 702 or 704, the reliability of the methodology is something that has to be established. So Ms. Ellens, if you could just go back and lay some foundation about that, then we can continue. So sustain.
Dr. Kwan, what is the standard practice in your field for treating a patient?
Yes, so the standard practice for treating a patient is that when they come in, we look at symptoms that they are displaying, and then from there we make hypotheses, as I explained earlier, and we form conclusions based off of any data and symptoms that have been displayed.
And is this reliable in your field?
Yes, given my medical degree from UNC Chapel Hill and my residency at Emory's Emergency Medical Department, yes.
All right, Dr. Kwan, I'd like to return to that first hypothesis you were talking about. Could you expand on that?
Yes, my first hypothesis was alcohol poisoning because it was clear that Petrillo had been drinking, he smelled of wine. However, during my examination, I realized that the symptoms did not support this hypothesis. Excessive tearing, severely contracted pupils, incontinence, involuntary muscle twitching, and a slowed pulse are not consistent with alcohol poisoning. In fact, alcohol poisoning tends to cause the reverse, dilated pupils and a rapid pulse.
So what was your second hypothesis?
My second hypothesis was another kind of poisoning, specifically organophosphate poisoning. I knew that Petrillo had come from a party at a winery, so it seemed plausible that he could have been exposed to pesticides, and all of his symptoms lined up with the ingestion of this specific pesticide, isofenfos organophosphate. From this, I moved on to the next step in scientific method, which was data collection.
What does data collection look like when you're the treating physician?
In this case, I ordered both the standard toxicology report and a poisons and toxins analysis, which I then analyzed. I also later obtained a copy of an analytical report from a sample from a bottle of wine that Petrillo drank. I received this from the Midlands Police Department.
So the first thing you mentioned was a standard toxicology report. Would you recognize that if I showed it to you?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, permission to display Exhibit 5, which has been pre-admitted into evidence per Stipulation 3.
Any objections from the defense?
No, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Dr. Kwan, what are we looking at here?
This is the toxicology report that I ordered.
And what's notable about this toxicology report?
This toxicology report indicates that Petrillo's acetylcholinesterase levels were very low. This is an enzyme that breaks down certain chemicals into other chemicals.
And why was this notable?
This is notable because acetylcholinesterase is directly related to organophosphate. In fact, it's so closely correlated that low levels can be used to almost affirmatively diagnose organophosphate poisoning.
Now, you also mentioned a poisons and toxicology report. Would you recognize that?
I would.
Your Honor, permission to display Exhibit 6.
If there are no objections from the defense.
No objections, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
And what is this, Dr. Kwan?
These are the results of the poisons and toxins analysis that I ordered.
Can you tell us what's notable about this?
So there's two things. First, that Mr. Petrillo's blood tested positive for isofenfos, which is an organophosphate pesticide. Second, that Mr. Petrillo's stomach contents also tested positive for isofenfos. The sample was taken from the liquid in Mr. Petrillo's stomach and not from any food remnants. So from there, we can tell that it was something that Mr. Petrillo drank, most likely the bottle of wine.
Now, that final report you mentioned that you received from the police department, would you recognize that?
I would.
Your Honor, permission to display Exhibit 10.
Any objections?
No objections, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Could you describe this for us, Dr. Kwan?
Yes, this is the results of the analytical report that I mentioned.
And what's notable about this?
As you can see in the bolded section, the sample of wine contained 91 micrograms per liter of isofenfos. That was the same organophosphate found in Mr. Petrillo's stomach contents and in his blood. And this is almost double the amount that should be present.
Now, based on your following of the scientific method, were you able to come to any conclusions in today's case?
Yes, based on one, Genesis Petrillo's very low acetylcholinesterase levels. Two, the poisonous pesticides, which were organophosphates present in the wine found in Genesis Petrillo's stomach and in the bottle that he drank from. And finally, its presence in his blood. I can conclude with scientific certainty that Genesis Petrillo died of organophosphate pesticide poisoning.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
I'm sorry, no problem. Timekeeper, do you wish to add something?
No, just that was time before she answered her question. I just didn't want to interrupt her.
Oh, okay. I took, did time expire when you turned your camera on?
Yeah, just like 2 seconds before I turned my camera on.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I will take that into consideration, but in the future, if opposing counsel runs out of time for any section, don't hesitate to interrupt them going forward. But at this point, does the defense wish to do cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead and proceed.
Hello, Dr. Kwan. So you're on the board of directors for Doctors for Organic Solutions, correct?
Yes, I am.
And you are an advocate against the use of chemical pesticides?
Yes, chemical pesticides can often harm both the environment and humans. And so for that reason, I do advocate for organic solutions.
And this case could be used to encourage lawmakers to impose regulations on chemical pesticides. Am I correct?
I mean, I guess it could, but I'm not a lawmaker. I'm not a policymaker. I'm a doctor.
All right, so to move into what happened on June 7th and 8th, 2019, Petrillo appeared to be heavily intoxicated when you first encountered him, correct?
He did. He smelt of wine, and I knew from Angel Rodriguez that they had come from a party at the winery.
And you did initially believe this to be a case of alcohol poisoning?
Initially, yes.
So did you not further evaluate Petrillo's BAC?
I did.
In what way did you further evaluate his BAC?
In the first report that we mentioned, the standard toxicology report, it also showed Petrillo's BAC levels in addition to his low acetylcholinesterase levels.
You did not take account of Petrillo's BAC prior to when you encountered him at the hospital, though, correct?
No, not prior to the hospital. I had no way of knowing what his BAC was at before he arrived.
So after Petrillo's death, you did not consider causes of death other than the presence of pesticides, correct?
I actually did. I examined all possible possibilities, but I came to the conclusion that it was organophosphate pesticide based off of the symptoms and the data I collected.
So for instance, can you confirm that Genesis' death was not caused by an allergic reaction?
Yes, normally allergic reactions display other symptoms such as rashes, and none of that was present, so it was highly unlikely.
And you did not examine Petrillo's liver function, either before or in observation after his death, correct?
No, I did not specifically examine his liver, but he was displaying incontinence, which can be a symptom of both organophosphate poisoning and something such as hepatic disease, which is a type of liver failure. And with hepatic disease, normally a patient would display pale stool. And in this case, the incontinence was not pale. So I was able to conclude from that it was not hepatic disease.
But you did not examine Petrillo's liver function, correct?
No, because there was no reason to. There was no symptoms that were consistent with hepatic disease, which would be failure of the liver. He was not displaying jaundice, which is a common symptom. And as I said, his stool was not consistent with hepatic disease.
So I'd like to talk a bit about the acetylcholinesterase levels. There are no other explanations for low levels of acetylcholinesterase, correct?
Oh, actually, there are. One of them is hepatic disease, which I just mentioned, but I was able to rule that out due to symptoms that Petrillo wasn't displaying, such as jaundice, and the fact that his stool, as I've said many times, was not pale, which it would be in the case of hepatic disease.
And one last question. You cannot confirm that the pesticide was ingested through the wine, correct?
I cannot conclude with 100% certainty, but the fact that it was in the liquid contents suggests that it was something that Petrillo ingested specifically through liquid, and the fact that the wine bottle also tested positive for isofenfos organophosphate. From that, I was able to conclude with scientific certainty that it was in the wine.
But like you said, you cannot conclude that the pesticide was ingested through the wine with 100% certainty.
Not with 100% certainty, but with scientific certainty. Scientific certainty is never 100%.
No further questions, Your Honor. Thank you.
No redirect, Your Honor.
Okay.
I asked
Can the
my
witness speak?
Excused.
Yes, the witness is excused. All right. Anything further from the plaintiff?
No, at this time, the plaintiff rests its case in chief and asks for a brief 5-minute recess before time permitting before the defense begins.
Okay. Let me check where we are on all loss. All loss is in roughly a little less than an hour and a half. I don't know what time constraints you're working with, so can plaintiff and defense weigh in on how that looks for them?
Yes, we're going to be around 23 minutes for our directs in total, and then whatever is left for closing after that. So
Okay. So does it look like we have time for a 5-minute recess?
I think so, probably. If we have you said we have an hour and a half about left, Your Honor?
Yes. Yeah. So all loss is I'm in Mountain Time right now, but I believe it's 12:46 there. And so what we will do is we will now take a recess. I have 11:22 or 23 right now, so we'll come back in 5 minutes at 11:28.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. It is now 11:28. Is everyone back from both teams, or do we need to give it a second?
Plaintiff is here.
And I believe all of the defense is here as well.
Perfect. All right. Well, is there anything we need to take up at this time before we go into the defense case in chief?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
Your Honor, at this point, the plaintiff would like to bring the attention of the court to Special Instruction 3 on party representatives.
Give me just a second. All right. You said number 3.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
So this states that the defense will not have a party representative since the plaintiff chose to pursue negligence per se. I believe there was a miscommunication about that earlier. I just wanted to clarify.
Okay, good to know. Defense counsel, I believe we talked about the defendant being present in trial today, but is it correct that they're not here?
Yes, Your Honor. That's also my understanding of Special Instruction 3. So Austin Lewis will no longer be designated as the party representative for the remainder of the trial. Okay,
that's fine with me. Defense, do you wish to, or anything further from the plaintiff? I'm assuming nothing further from the plaintiff then. So defense counsel, if you would like to call your first witness.
Your Honor, at this time, the defense begins its case in chief and calls Dr. R. Cannon to the stand.
Dr. Cannon, I will give you the same notice I've given every other witness since you have technically been sequestered. You are sworn to tell the truth under Federal Rule of Evidence 603, and we will go forward under that presumption.
May I begin?
Whenever you're ready.
Hello, Dr. Cannon. Could you please introduce yourself to the court? I'm sorry, Dr. Cannon, we cannot hear you.
My name is Rajesh Cannon.
And what do you do?
I am a medical doctor with specific expertise in toxicology and pharmacology.
All right, and where did you go to school?
I got my degree in chemistry in 1990 from Ohio State before going to medical school at Harvard in 1996, focusing there on toxicology and pharmacology specifically. I worked as the staff for several hospitals, both in Massachusetts and here in Midlands, before finally taking up the position I'm at now with Gardner Consulting.
All right, so how are you involved in today's case?
I was hired by Mrs. Martini's attorneys on April 2nd, 2020, to assess the conclusions of a Dr. Jimmy Quant, as well as to investigate the relationship between Mr. Petrillo's death and Mrs. Martini's winery.
What materials did you look at to aid in your investigation?
I looked at a couple toxicology and lab testing reports, as well as Dr. Kwan's report and the affidavit of Angel Rodriguez, among other exhibits.
Were these materials sufficient?
Yes, they were.
And what method did you use in this case?
The method that I use is the CAD method, which stands for comparison, analysis, and diagnosis.
Has this method been peer reviewed?
Absolutely. This is the diagnostic method that I developed years ago while working with Harvard Medical School. It's been peer reviewed. It's the best diagnostic method, and it's what I teach in my classes at medical school.
Okay, and did you apply this method reliably to the case?
Yes, I did.
All right, let's move into the case itself. What were your conclusions about what happened?
I was able to say that there was no one definitive cause of Mr. Petrillo's death, that there were a number of different possibilities.
Let's take a step back. What was the first step of your method again?
The first step that I used was comparison. This is where I do a high-level overview and I compare different potential causes of death.
What causes did you compare in this case?
In this case, I compared the possibilities of alcohol poisoning, an allergic reaction, as well as liver disease.
So after looking at these causes, what did you do next?
The next step is the analysis part. So this is where I take my initial conjecture and I support it with the data that I'm given and see what conclusions I can make later.
Okay. What did you look at in terms of alcohol poisoning?
I looked at the BAC of Genesis Petrillo. Genesis Petrillo's BAC was approximately 0.16% when he arrived at the hospital. While this is not indicative of a likely cause of death, it definitely means that Mr. Petrillo's BAC could have been much higher earlier in the evening, especially combined with the fact that I read Angel Rodriguez's affidavit and I saw that Mr. Petrillo was in fact vomiting at the engagement dinner, which is another sign of alcohol poisoning.
So why exactly do you think it could have been higher?
Mr. Petrillo quit drinking at approximately 12:42 a.m. on June 8th, 2019, meaning that his peak BAC would have had to have come much earlier, just simply due to the fact that alcohol breaks down in the liver every hour you stop drinking. So we must know that for his BAC to be 0.16, his peak BAC would have had to have been much higher.
Okay, let's move forward. What was the second possibility that you looked at?
The second possibility that I looked at was the possibility of an allergic reaction.
And what supports this theory?
There was two big things. One was the presence of a buffet. Buffets are known to have a lot of known foodborne allergens, as well as the fact that Mr. Petrillo had not had regular health checkups, especially in the last 3 years leading up to his death. So it's very, very possible that he contracted an allergy and didn't even know that he had it.
Okay, so what was the third possibility you looked at?
The third possibility that I looked at was the possibility of a liver disease.
So what is liver disease?
Simply put, it's the inability for the liver to break down different compounds and specifically things such as alcohol and drugs. This is usually leads to low acetylcholinesterase level.
What supports this theory as a cause of Genesis Petrillo's death?
So there were at least two factors that I saw that could have supported this.
What can you describe the first factor?
So the first factor was low acetylcholinesterase levels. This is exhibited both by a tox report that I was given, as well as the fact that in his original examination, Dr. Kwan saw that Mr. Petrillo had dilated pupils, another indication of a low acetylcholinesterase level.
So what was the second factor that you looked at?
The second factor was that Petrillo did not have regular health checkups. Specifically, Mr. Petrillo did not have blood tests 3 years previous to his death. Given this, it's very likely that they could have had an undiagnosed liver disease and they just did not know about it.
All right, let's move into the third step of your method. What was your diagnosis?
I was able to conclude that Mr. Petrillo's death was definitively due to respiratory arrest. However, what caused that respiratory arrest to occur could have been any number of things. There's just too many unanswered questions for me to tell you one thing, which is why I came up with 3 possible causes of death.
I have no further questions.
All right, cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, you're a consultant, correct?
That's right.
And you work for a firm called Gardner Consulting.
That's correct.
And one of the largest clients of Gardner Consulting is a pesticide company known as Detsky Roach and Rodent Killer.
Right, that was one of my engagements.
And before you took the stand today, you were contacted by the CEO of Detsky Roach and Rodent Killer, weren't you?
I was. Oftentimes our clients will try to encourage us to side one way or the other. As an impartial researcher, I'm committed to just working with the data and doing the best I can.
But the CEO told you that it was very important that pesticides not be found to be the cause of Genesis Petrillo's death if you'd like to retain their business, correct?
Right, and we get these messages all the time, and we do our best to ignore them and stick to the scientific method, just like I learned in medical school.
Right, and isn't it true that you would lose this client if the defense lost in today's case?
Honestly, I can't tell you.
All right, now let's move on to talk about the facts in today's case. So you would agree with me that the facts in today's case are consistent with Genesis Petrillo's death being caused by an organophosphate pesticide, correct?
Certainly some of the facts, absolutely.
Now let's talk about some of the other potential causes you mentioned. First, on alcohol poisoning. Now, Genesis Petrillo had a BAC of 0.16 when he was tested at the hospital,
Right,
correct?
that's correct.
And in all of your experience as a consultant, you have never heard of a single case where a BAC of 0.16 led to death?
No, in all my experience as a doctor, I have not seen a BAC of 0.16 lead to death. However, we know that's not Mr. Petrillo's peak BAC that night.
Right, so you mentioned this peak BAC, but you would agree with me that the tests in all of these other cases where a 0.16 couldn't lead to death, those weren't conducted at peak BAC either because they were conducted in hospitals?
That's not true. Several of them were, in fact, peak BAC, and in different levels, you can't accurately say that when they're at the hospital that it's not their peak. So, no, that's not true.
But you cannot confirm that all of those tests were taken at peak BAC?
Absolutely not. But working in the ER as well as in toxicology, I certainly have seen severe cases of alcohol poisoning and people's BACs peaking.
All right, now, alcohol poisoning also would not explain the isophenphos organophosphate in Mr. Petrillo's stomach contents or blood work, would it?
It would not.
And it would not explain his constricted pupils?
That would not. I thought of hepatic disease or liver disease when I saw the constricted pupils.
I'm not asking about your other ideas. I'm just asking specifically that alcohol poisoning was not consistent with Genesis Petrillo's symptoms of constricted pupils.
That's correct.
All right, now I'd like to move on to your hypothesis about allergies. Now, none of the medical evidence you've reviewed indicated that he suffered from any allergies.
No, it did not.
And if Petrillo had suffered from an allergic reaction, there most likely would have been some visible form of rash or inflammation, correct?
Yes, that's typically what we see as a result of anaphylaxis. I merely included it in my report just based off of the fact that I wanted to include all the possibilities within scientific certainty.
But to be clear, you found absolutely nothing that supported that this was a possibility besides a buffet?
Right, and the fact that Mr. Petrillo had not had regular health checkups, correct.
Now I'd like to move on to your third hypothesis of hepatic disease. Genesis Petrillo didn't show any signs of hepatic disease in all of his medical records, did he?
That's not true.
You're saying that there were signs in the medical records that indicated hepatic disease?
Absolutely. Low acetylcholinesterase levels is in fact an indicator of hepatic disease.
Dr. Cannon, I'm not asking you about the tests that Dr. Kwan had run. I'm asking you about the past medical records that you reviewed before. Did those contain measures of low acetylcholinesterase?
No, they did not. The medical records from 3 years before Mr. Petrillo did not have any strong indication of hepatic disease, absolutely.
All right, thank you for clarifying that for the jury. Now, hepatic disease also generally causes jaundice, correct?
Among other things, yes.
And jaundice means yellowing of the skin or eyes.
That's correct.
And there was no jaundice displayed by Genesis Petrillo on the night of his death, was there?
No.
And in the end, because of this, you concluded that hepatic disease was the least likely cause of Mr. Petrillo's death.
That's correct. I did rank them based off of ordinality in my report. However, I wanted to include all relevant possibilities.
And even if he was suffering from hepatic disease, and even if that exacerbated the symptoms of pesticide poisoning would still be a partial cause of death?
Absolutely. Partial. But again, I could not say that it's the definitive or the singular cause of death.
So after reviewing the unlikeliness of all three of these possibilities, you concluded that the most likely cause of Genesis Petrillo's death was organophosphate pesticide poisoning, correct?
Right. That and a combination of other factors. Absolutely.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
All right. Do we need a redirect?
No, Your Honor. May I
Okay.
ask that my witness be allowed to step down from the stand?
Yes, the witness is excused, and you may call your next witness.
Your Honor, the defense calls Blair Osborne to the stand.
Okay.
Please.
Miss.
My apologies.
Well, Miss Osborne, I just want to remind you that you've been sworn to tell the truth before the court today. You
Yes,
can
Your
proceed.
Please introduce yourself to the jury, Miss Osborne.
Hey y'all, my name is Blair Osborne. I own a private event company right here in Midlands. It's called Bliss by Blair Events. I decided to call it Bliss because nothing makes me or my clients more blissful than seeing their dream events come to life.
And what kind of events, Miss Osborne?
I'm actually so lucky in that I get to be involved in a wide variety of events. So whether it's a retirement party, a birthday, or a work retreat, or a wedding. But maybe it's because I've seen The Wedding Planner a few too many times and I envision myself as Jennifer Lopez, but weddings are my favorite.
Have you ever organized an event at Peony Estates?
Yes, I've organized many events there, actually. I started working with them in 2015, and since then I've been able to host over 82 events.
And were you working on any particular events in June of last year at Peony Estates?
I was working on the wedding of Casey Soto and Genesis Petrillo, but such a sad ending to what was about to be the beginning of the rest of their lives together.
Now let's talk a little bit more about the planning of this wedding. When were you first contacted about planning the wedding?
Yeah, so Harper contacted me. We had our first meeting around October 12th of 2018.
And what did you do next?
So from that time on, that entire rest of the fall, I was working on logistical details. So things like contacting vendors, remeasuring space, picking out decorations, stuff like that.
And when did you meet with Casey and Genesis?
I met with Casey and Genesis in early January of 2019.
And what did you discuss in this meeting?
We talked about their ideas for the rehearsal dinner, for the wedding ceremony, and for the wedding reception as well.
And how was the rest of the planning leading up to the wedding?
To be honest with you, it was a little less than perfect. There were a few bickering and, miscommunications, stuff like that. As is typically the case, the weddings I plan, tensions and emotions can run high, but overall, I'd say it went pretty well.
So you mentioned the night of the rehearsal dinner. I want to talk a little bit more about this particular evening. What happened on that night?
Yeah, so the beginning of that night, things were a little more hectic because I would say the rehearsal dinner is really when my job comes to life.
And what do you mean by your job comes to life?
So prior to the rehearsal dinner, most of my job is in logistical communication and organization. But then when it comes down to that night, I really become hands-on. So I'm overseeing every aspect of the event, whether it's checking in on the kitchen and making sure the caterers are running everything on time, or even just surveying the premises to make sure everything's safe for the guests.
And how did the rest of the night go?
So the night went well. So around the toast, I would say it was really touching. Harper gave Genesis this beautiful bottle of wine. And then after that, there was dessert. Yeah.
And what happened after the toasts?
As I said, after the toast was dessert. And then as the night went on, guests would tend to trickle back to their rooms. And I'd say by about midnight, most people were gone.
And what did you do next?
So like I said, most people were gone at this time, but I did see Genesis and Drew and Angel as well. And they were talking by the cocktail table. So I went over and go talk to them. And then I finished cleaning up.
Now, the following morning, what happened when you first arrived at Peony Estates?
So I always love to get up bright and early, whether or not I have an event. But since I had the wedding this morning, I got up at 6:30 and I went on over there and began preparations. And around 7:15, I saw Harper. But then we started to realize that Angel and Genesis were missing.
And when did you realize something was wrong?
Like I said, when we didn't see them for the next little bit, and the wedding was coming on, we knew something was wrong. So we went to look for them. And then later we learned the tragic news.
And when did you learn what happened to Genesis?
It was just a little bit later in that morning.
And Ms. Osborne, in your history of working with Peony Estates, have you ever seen anything that was unsafe?
No, like I've said, I've been working with them since 2015 and I've hosted over 82 events there. And every time I've worked there, everything has been so hygienic, so clean, so well organized. And that's why I always recommend them to my clients.
Objection as to improper character evidence.
Okay, can you elaborate?
I believe that the witness is testifying to the cleanliness repeatedly of Peony Estates to show that since they were clean on several occasions, they would have been once again this time.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Porter, how do you respond?
Your Honor, the witness here is using her rationally based perception to make a claim to testifying based on her interaction in the past with Peony Estates. She's simply stating that in the past, she has never seen anything of this nature, of this unhygienic nature. She's not stating that and nothing could have happened. She's just simply stating that in her past, she's never seen anything.
Okay, I agree that it is her rationally based perception, but the objection was to character evidence. Can you tell me a little bit about how you plan to use this evidence and respond on the grounds of 603?
Yes. Clarification, please.
Sure.
From the opposing counsel on the question?
On the objection?
On the objection.
So hold up. Opposing counsel is objecting under the grounds of character evidence, which means he's arguing that you're using this evidence of their past conduct to imply that on the day in question, they conducted themselves in the same way. How do you respond on the grounds of character evidence?
Your Honor, we are not using this. We are not presenting this for the truth of the matter asserted. We are simply presenting this as a statement of subsequent action, demonstrating that the witness has in the past never experienced anything of unhygienic nature. We are not stating that nothing could have ever occurred, simply that she has never witnessed anything.
Okay. In that case, Mr. Moley, I see your concern here. What I will ask you to do is to re-raise your objection if they start to make that implication. But for now, I do think that this witness has a lot of background with the venue and can testify to what she's seen. If you feel like opposing counsel at any point in trial tries to imply that that is how things continued on the day in question, I will certainly sustain your objection at that point.
Yes, Your Honor.
And we are no further questions. Thank you.
Okay. Would you like to, let's see, cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You sure may.
Now, Ms. Osborne, I'd like to go over a few of the things you had just testified to on direct examination, if that's all right. Now, Ms. Osborne, you've hosted several events at Peony Estates, not just the wedding, that's correct?
Yes.
And you were asked to plan this specific wedding by Harper Martini?
Yes, I was.
And Miss Martini is the mother of Casey Soda, that's correct?
Yes, sir.
And you didn't meet with Miss Martini until October 12th, like you said.
Yes, that was our first meeting.
And when you met with Miss Martini on the 12th, you were told that you weren't to tell Genesis nor Casey about anything to do with the wedding, right?
Yes, I think Harper had this whole surprise idea going, like she was going to create this super fun dream event for them and then just not let them know until later. And I was super excited about it.
Miss Martini told you that Casey and Genesis didn't know they were getting married at Peony Estates.
Yes, like I said, it was a surprise.
And you were asked not to tell them.
Yes.
And this made you uncomfortable, didn't it?
A little bit at first, but then when I really got on board with the idea, I loved it.
Well, actually, you were paid to not say anything to the couple, isn't that right?
Yes, this is standard in my practice. A lot of times people want to do a surprise event or like a destination event, so that can make the rates go higher. So like in this case, since it was a surprise, I couldn't talk to the wedding party. So instead, I would go into their social media and look for things like, ooh, what kind of color scheme would they like in their wedding? So yeah, it was a higher rate for that reason.
Well, actually, you did eventually meet with the couple on January 12th, didn't you?
Yes.
And so it wasn't a secret forever.
No, it was just the whole fall that I spent all those months planning. They didn't have the information until a little bit later.
That's right. You kept it a secret for 4 months.
Yeah.
Now, I'd like to talk a little bit more about your wedding planning process. Now, you had a meeting with Harper Martini concerning wedding decor. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you overheard a phone call between Miss Martini and an employee of Peony Estates, didn't you?
I believe so.
And during this phone call, you overheard Miss Martini said, "I don't care what that clown Adkins O'Keefe says."
Yeah, I think that's what she said.
Miss Martini said, "Do not waste the employee's time with more training."
I think that's what I heard. I don't know what it's about.
And finally, you heard Miss Martini said, "Keep the bottle where it is."
Yeah,
And then Miss Martini hung up the phone.
to my recollection, yes.
And that was the end of the conversation.
Yes.
Now, I'd like to talk about one more day, if that's all right, Miss Osborne. June 7th, 2019 was the day of the rehearsal dinner, correct?
Yes, it was.
And you were in attendance?
Yes, as I said, I was really kind of overseeing everything that happened at that dinner.
And you watched Miss Martini give a toast to the happy couple, right?
I did. Toasts are like my favorite part of any wedding because I think it really shows how much your close friends and family support you.
And at the end of the toast, you saw Miss Martini present Genesis with a bottle of wine. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you saw Genesis drink this bottle of wine that was given to him?
Yes.
And you never saw anyone else drink out of this bottle. Is that correct?
No, but like I said, I was manning a lot of different areas, so I don't know if someone could have.
That is a yes to my question. No one else drank out of this bottle to your knowledge.
To my knowledge, yes, but like I said, I wasn't overseeing that particular bottle the entire night.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
All right. Is there any redirect?
No, I just ask my witness be excused.
The witness is excused. And defense, do you have another witness?
Yes, Your Honor. We call Miss Austin Lewis to the stand.
Miss Lewis, I will remind you that you are sworn to tell the truth and the whole truth today in trial. You may begin.
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning. Could you please introduce yourself to the court?
Why, yes, my name is Austin Lewis.
Ms. Lewis, what do you do for a living?
I make wine, and I love it. I grew up amongst fellow vintners, fellow winemakers. My mom was a winemaker in Midlands, just like I am, and she taught me how to be a strong female in a male-dominated field.
Where do you currently work?
Now I work at Harper Martini's winery, Peony Estates. Harper is definitely an Albert Weinstein, and we are the perfect partners in wine. Harper handles the business side, I handle the technical winemaking side.
What do you do there?
Well, some days I feel like I'm wearing 50 hats, but I style them all well. I'm in charge of growing, harvesting, bottling, aging, pretty much anything that deals with wine. Harper deals with the business side again. But I'm not saying that running Peony Estates was always easy.
Ms. Lewis, what do you mean?
Peony Estates borders the Salo Swamp, which means that we have to deal with a lot of pesky critters that love to eat our grapes, just like the slopes of Burgundy.
How does Peony Estates deal with these pests?
Well, we really tried to control the infestations with organic solutions. I wanted to brand our winery as like an organic place, but it was simply impossible. The cost just added up and it was not adequate.
So then how does Peony Estates deal with these pests now?
Well, since October 15th, we started using isofenfos, which are chemical pesticides, on the vines and around the foundations of our production buildings. I didn't really like the idea of our crops not being organic, but we had to change our brand.
Did you have any other concerns about these pesticides?
Yes, I did. I was concerned about the buildup on the crops themselves. Once again, our winery is on a slope. So we have our nice grapes up at the top so they can make rich tastes based off of the thin soil. But if we spray pesticides on there, they go down the slope and end up contaminating at a higher degree the ones on the lower side.
Do you use pesticides anywhere else besides outside on the property?
Since 2018, we do. We had a huge infestation in the cave and bottling area, so we turned to bug off pesticides. Yeah.
And where did you use this bug off pesticides in 2018?
We started using them in like the cave area and inside some areas.
And did your staff go through any training on how to use this pesticide?
Yes, starting in October 2015, I provided our employees with mandatory training on the proper use and storage of pesticides.
Ms. Lewis, what did this training involve?
Well, part of this training involved me telling my employees that they needed to wash their hands every time they interacted with pesticides, and they also needed to change into a fresh pair of clothes.
Were there any other parts to this training?
Yes. One time, one of our employees forgot to do so just because they were lazy. So I had to return the pesticides back to the storage area and teach them not to do that.
Ms. Lewis, were there any steps that you took personally to ensure the safe use of pesticides?
As I mentioned before, I was concerned about the unsafe buildup of pesticides in the bottom of that slope area. So in 2016, I roped off that portion of the winery, and we would throw out the grapes that were found in that area just to avoid any contamination of any sorts.
Were you able to do this with every batch of grapes?
No, in August 2018, I was out of town on a family emergency, so I asked Harper to throw out the grapes in that area.
Do you have any reason to believe that Harper didn't follow your instructions?
Nope.
Now, was the throwing out the grapes your biggest concern at that point?
No, we were scared about the pesticides being used on inside areas.
And at what points did you use the pesticides in these inside areas?
In mid-July, we had a wine cave and we kept the pesticides there.
And did you ever spray this wine cave?
Yes, we cleared the cave of all of the wine casks as required by health code and sprayed and waited 48 hours to put the casks back in.
Now, Ms. Lewis, was this the only time you sprayed indoors?
No, in order to keep up with the pests, we had to periodically spray more pesticides indoors. This also meant following the health and safety regulations each time for indoor spraying.
And what did following those regulations involve?
We had to move all the casks out, spray the pesticides, wait 48 hours, and then put everything back in just to make sure that no contamination continued further.
To your knowledge, did you follow these health and safety codes each time you sprayed?
Yes.
Now, Ms. Lewis, what does this all have to do with today's case?
I think today's case is talking about the mishandling on Peony Estates side with the pesticides, and I can say from my firsthand experience, that's never the case.
Well, why not, Ms. Lewis?
I took so many precautions to ensure that all of our employees knew exactly what to do when handling pesticides.
Thank you. No further questions.
All right, cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. So, Ms. Lewis, I'd like to start with your relationship with Peony Estates. So you came to Peony Estates because they offered you a substantial raise from your previous job, right?
Yeah, they did. I'm great at what I do.
And not only did Ms. Martini, in fact, offer you a raise, but also a 10% stake in the business.
Yeah, she sure did. We were starting from the roots up.
So would you agree with me that if Peony Estates were to be doing poorly financially, you would also be similarly impacted?
Yeah, I sure would be.
I'm sorry, is there an objection?
Yes, Your Honor. I object to relevance.
Okay, of which testimony specifically?
Regarding whether or not Ms. Lewis would lose money and stake in Peony Estates if it were to close down. I do not see how this makes any fact more or less probable in today's case in regard to negligence per se.
May I
Ms.
respond, Your Honor?
Yes, please do.
Your Honor, this is going directly to Ms. Lewis's bias. We want to make sure that the jury understands that she does have a stake in Peony Estates staying open.
Okay. Since it goes to the witness's credibility, I do think that this is relevant. So I'll allow you some leeway to go into this area, Counselor. Overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
So, Ms. Lewis, I'll ask again. If Peony Estates were to be doing poorly financially, this would impact you similarly?
Yeah, it would.
So, in fact, in your affidavit, you said that Peony Estates, losing Peony Estates would be the last thing that you want. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, what's the objection?
Hearsay, Your Honor, may it be heard.
No, I see where the hearsay problem is. Ms. Callaghan, would you respond?
Your Honor, I'm happy to rephrase the question.
Okay, okay. All right, I'll allow you to rephrase the question, but for now the objection is sustained and the question as posed was stricken.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. So to go back, Ms. Lewis, if Peony Estates loses this suit, you believe that it would likely have to shut down?
I could see that happening.
Lack of personal foundation or lack of foundation.
Okay, elaborate, please. I'm sorry, I think we actually talked over each other. Would you elaborate on the foundation objection?
Yes, my apologies, Your Honor. The opposing counsel just asked Austin Lewis whether or not she knew that it was likely Peony Estates to shut down. She simply oversees, as she stated, the handling of the day-to-day operations and creating and crafting the wine, not the actual business side of it. Therefore, she would have no foundation and no knowledge as to whether or not it'd be likely to shut down.
Okay, Counselor. It's not necessary. I'm going to overrule the objection because this is cross-examination. If the witness is not familiar with what would happen in the day-to-day, she is free to respond. But based on the witness's involvement with the winery, it sounds like she would be qualified to respond on that. So overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Lewis, to restate my question, if Peony Estates loses the suit, you do believe that it would likely shut down?
I'm not exactly sure, but based on Harper's worrying advice, I would assume so.
And you would be very unhappy if Peony Estates shut down, right?
Yeah, I love the place.
So let's move on to the winery itself. You stated that you always threw away the grapes at the bottom of that slope?
Yes, I did.
But in 2018, in fact, you weren't there to oversee that disposal, were you?
No, I gave that responsibility to Harper.
And do you know for a fact that she threw away those grapes?
I wasn't there. I was on vacation, as you said earlier.
So a yes or no, were you aware if Harper Martini ended up throwing away those grapes?
No.
Let's move on to Midland's regulations themselves. You are familiar with the codes on pesticides, right?
Yeah, I know them like the back of my hand.
And you know that these laws, in fact, prohibit having pesticides in an active production area?
I do.
Well, the bottling area at Peony Estates, that is an active production area, is it not?
It is, but let me explain that really quick. So, have you ever parked in in like an area that you're not supposed to, and every single day you're parking in the right area? That's what happened that day. It was just a fluke, really.
Well, Ms. Lewis, I haven't gotten to a specific day. I was just asking if the bottling area at Peony Estates is active.
I'm sorry, I think you cut out. Can you re-ask the question, please?
Ms. Lewis, I'm not asking about a specific day yet. I just want to know if the bottling area is an active production area.
It is, yeah.
So this is in fact where Peony Estates removes wine from their casks and puts them in the bottle?
Yes.
So the wine is exposed in that process?
Oh, yeah. It needs to air out. That's how it gets some of its flavor.
So, Ms. Lewis, let's move on to the issues of pests that you talked about indirect. In May of 2019, you did develop a mite issue at Peony Estates, right?
Yeah, those are some nasty critters.
And so you decided that it was necessary to bring pesticides into the bottling area to deal with this?
Yeah.
But as you stated on direct, you were in fact afraid of bringing pesticides into a bottling area.
Yeah, initially I was.
But as we established earlier, you do always follow safety procedures, don't you?
We do our best, yeah.
But in fact, on this day, May 8th, didn't you bring pesticides into the production area before you removed wine bottles or before you sealed off the equipment?
Yeah. Is this the event on in October 2015?
May 8th of 2019.
Oh, okay, yes.
And you knew, in fact, that doing this was a health code violation?
Yes.
So in fact, on that day, you did receive a health code violation, did you not?
Yes, we did.
Because of this, you wanted to retrain the staff?
Yeah, and I did.
You did retrain the staff?
I gave my own personal recommendations to the staff, and I also moved the carrying shed for the pesticides 600 feet closer to where they would be used. So this mishap wouldn't happen again.
So in fact, not only did you want to retrain the staff, as you say you did, but also you were instructed to by the FDA health inspector, right?
Yes, I was.
But didn't Harper forbid you from retraining the staff, as you say you did?
I'm sorry.
Miss,
question.
yeah, Miss Callaghan, we're having a little bit of trouble hearing you. Can you re-ask or rephrase? I don't care the question.
Sure. I asked if Harper forbade Miss Lewis from retraining staff.
Harper was concerned that the training would cost a lot of money and take up a lot of the employees' time, but I still did it anyways.
So it's your testimony today that you did retrain the staff?
I gave not full retraining. I just gave them pointers.
Okay. So going back to what Ms. Martinez said, she did say that retraining staff would be a waste of time and money.
I'm so sorry. I cannot hear your question.
Yeah, if you could just re-ask it.
So Ms. Martini did forbid you from doing so, as it would be a waste of time and money.
Yes, that was her concern.
And did Harper Martini herself happen to receive any retraining?
Objection. Lack of personal knowledge.
May I be heard?
Yes.
Your Honor, Ms. Lewis has stated that she does the retraining of the employees of Peony Estates. It would have been in her jurisdiction to know this.
Okay, so I'm going to sustain the objection right now, but why don't you just ask the witness if she conducted retraining of Harper?
Sure. Ms. Lewis, did you happen to retrain Ms. Martini?
No, Harper doesn't really deal with training or the production of wine. Once again, she's more on the finance business side.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. No further questions.
All right, is there any redirect?
No, Your Honor. I just asked that my witness be allowed to step down.
Yes, the witness is excused.
And at this
We
point,
have,
my apologies.
sorry?
At this point, the defense rests its case in chief.
Okay, perfect. We are now ready to go into closing arguments. Does either team desire a recess before closing?
Could we get a brief, like 3 to 5 minute recess, depending on your
Certainly.
honor?
Certainly. Can I just inquire from the timekeepers how much time is remaining for close, because we are 35 minutes from all loss right now?
Yes. Hold on one second. Where did I put my paper? It was 9 minutes and 30 something seconds for defense, and then I can't remember what the plaintiff was.
Okay. Don't the rules have a specific time limit that's set aside for opening and closing?
Yes, Your Honor. It's 12 minutes total, so you subtract the opening time, and that's what you have left.
Okay, I have it now. I'm sorry.
We have
Okay,
8 minutes
no problem.
remaining for the plaintiff.
And how much for the defense did you say?
9 minutes and 28 seconds.
Okay.
I have the.
All right. All right. Well, with that understanding, let's take a 5-minute recess and come back here at 12:16.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Are the parties ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right.
Your Honor.
Well, then we will hear closing arguments from the plaintiff whenever you're ready.
Excuse me. One moment.
No problem.
Hope that's not COVID. Okay. Ready, Gabby? Okay. Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury, the poison is in the bottle and the poison is in the blood. June 8th, 2019 should have been one of the happiest days of Mr. Genesis Petrillo's life. The evening before, he had hosted a wedding rehearsal dinner with his fiancée, Casey Soto. At this rehearsal dinner, he drank from a bottle of 2019 Cara wine. A few hours later, Mr. Petrillo was rushed to the hospital where he died of pesticide poisoning. Now, he didn't just die of pesticide poisoning for no reason. Mr. Petrillo died of pesticide poisoning because Peony Estates had been improperly storing their pesticides in the bottling area right next to that bottle of 2019 Cara wine for months. Because of Peony Estates' negligence, instead of June 8th being the happiest day of Mr. Petrillo's life, it was the last day of Mr. Petrillo's life. Now, because of this, the plaintiff has brought a claim of negligence per se against Peony Estates. Now, when we brought that claim into court today, we did bring with us a burden. We had to prove to you, beyond our preponderance of the evidence, meaning slightly more likely than not, two things. First, that Peony Estates violated Midland statutes by improperly storing pesticide. And second, that that violation was the direct and proximate cause of Mr. Genesis Petrillo's death. Members of the jury, we've met that burden. The proof of that is in the bottle and it's in the blood. Let's start with the bottle. Now, the first witness you heard from today was Miss Casey Soto, who told you that at Peony Estates, every August, grapes are harvested, stored over the winter, and then bottled in late spring and early summer. And that 2019 was no different, except for the fact that in 2019, at that same period, Peony Estates was dealing with a rampant pesticide problem that resulted in them failing an inspection because they were storing pesticides unsafely. Now, Austin Lewis got up here and tried to tell you that they always followed the proper safety protocol, but members of the jury, you heard Austin Lewis describe to you multiple occasions in which they were in direct violation of the Midlands Health Code knowingly by moving pesticides into the bottling area before they had removed the wine or removed the necessary equipment. Now, you also heard from Blair Osborne talking about how clean Peony Estates was. But what you really heard from Blair Osborne was that the owner of Peony Estates said that she didn't care what that clown of a health inspector said, and that the pesticides should be kept exactly where they were, regardless of the risk it posed to consumer health. Now, you heard all about that failed inspection from our second witness, Inspector Adkins O'Keefe. Mr. Adkins O'Keefe told you about the three conditions of Midlands Building Code Section 12100, that pesticides must be identified, held, and stored in a manner that prevents against contamination. And you heard Mr. O'Keefe say that Peony Estates failed those last two conditions, and that he was horrified to see giant industrial-sized canisters of pesticide in the bottling area, right next to a bottle of 2019 Cara wine. Now, on to the blood. You heard from Dr. Kwan today that Genesis Petrillo died of pesticide poisoning. You heard that those symptoms that Mr. Genesis Petrillo experienced, contracted pupils, respiratory failure, were only consistent with isofenfos organophosphate poisoning, combined with the low acetylcholinesterase levels that again only indicated one cause. And that cause was confirmed by testing both of Mr. Petrillo's blood, his stomach contents, and that infamous bottle of 2019 Cara wine, which contained a concentration of isofenfos organophosphate almost twice the legal limit. Bottle to blood, and Genesis Petrillo died. Now, Dr. Cannon got up here today and he tried to tell you that there could have been other causes of Genesis Petrillo's death. He mentioned allergies, hepatic disease, and alcohol poisoning. But members of the jury, you heard Dr. Cannon's testimony. You heard him admit that for each of those three causes, there were symptoms that just didn't add up. You heard him admit that alcohol poisoning didn't match because the blood alcohol content of Genesis Petrillo was only 0.16%. And furthermore, you heard from Dr. Kwan that many of the symptoms Genesis Petrillo was displaying would have been reversed exactly if it had been alcohol poisoning rather than pesticide poisoning. Now, Dr. Cannon also mentioned the possibility of allergies, but you heard him say on cross-examination that he found no evidence to support that an allergy might have, an allergic reaction might have occurred. There was no record of any allergies of Genesis Petrillo, and there was no rash and no inflammation. Finally, he talked about something called hepatic disease, which Dr. Kwan explained to you in great detail on cross-examination is not consistent with Genesis Petrillo's symptoms because Genesis Petrillo did not exhibit a pale stool or jaundice, and furthermore showed no history of having this issue. And at the end of the day, Dr. Cannon concluded that simply that the acetylcholinesterase levels were not enough to say that hepatic disease could have been the cause of death. And so in his final conclusion that he showed y'all today, he said that isofenfos organophosphate pesticide poisoning was the most likely cause of death. Now, members of the jury, the defense is going to get up here and they're going to try to say that Peony Estates never violated any statutes and that Genesis Petrillo must have died of something else. But I want you to remember two things. The bottle of Cara wine with over twice the legally allowed limit of isofenfos organophosphate pesticide, and the blood, which indicated that he had died of that poisoning. Find the defendant liable.
All right, does the defense wish to make a closing argument?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Members of the jury, here's what we know. The death of Genesis Petrillo was a tragic event. For Casey Soto to lose her spouse the day before they were supposed to spend the rest of their lives together is a pain that no one should have to feel. The community of Peony Estates aches for her loss. But we cannot take responsibility for it. Why? Because there are still too many unanswered questions. Now, members of the jury, today's case is about negligence. And I want to remind you of the 4 elements of negligence per se that you must keep in mind as I recount to you the facts of today's case. First, the plaintiffs must prove that the defendant violated a statute. Second, the plaintiffs must show that that violated statute was a safety statute. Third, the plaintiff must show that the act or the omission of the act caused the harm that that safety statute was intended to prevent. And fourth, the plaintiffs must show that the people who were that the statute was intended to protect are part of the class of the plaintiff. Additionally, the plaintiff must show that the act or the omission of the act by Peony Estates was the direct or proximate cause of the harm incurred on to Genesis Petrillo. But members of the jury, there are still too many unanswered questions. Now, first, what actually caused the death of Genesis Petrillo? Now, the plaintiff brought before you today their expert, Dr. Kwan, who told you that the only reasonable medical explanation was ingestion of a specific pesticide organophosphate and respiratory arrest as a result of the ingestion of that pesticide. But members of the jury, our expert, Dr. Cannon, took a look at Dr. Kwan's report and concluded that it just left too many questions unanswered and too many other possibilities. First, on the night of June 7th, 2019, Genesis could have easily had a higher BAC than Dr. Kwan measured when Genesis made it to the hospital. Dr. Cannon told us that Genesis' peak BAC could have been much higher as she stopped drinking around 12:42 a.m. and didn't make it to the hospital to 8 a.m. Over time, the liver breaks down the amount of alcohol in the blood, meaning that the peak BAC could have been high enough that night to cause Genesis' death as a result of alcohol poisoning. Second, Dr. Cannon told us that given the wide array of buffet foods and drinks at the wedding that night, at the rehearsal that night, Genesis could have easily died from an underlying allergy that she had not had diagnosed. Dr. Cannon told us that there was plenty of different types of food and drink that night, and that Genesis hadn't been to the doctors for a checkup in 3 years previously, meaning that time period could have easily had an underlying allergic reaction be created. Third, Dr. Cannon told us that it could have been hepatic disease that also went undiagnosed with Genesis Petrillo. Now, in the plaintiff's closing, and I wrote it down to make sure I got it right, they said that there was only one cause of low acetylcholinesterase levels. Well, members of the jury, that's not true. Dr. Cannon told us so. One of the other causes of low acetylcholinesterase levels is hepatic disease. And on the night of June 7th, 2019, Dr. Kwan saw that Genesis had dilated constricted pupils, which is consistent with hepatic disease and a reaction by the liver by underlying hepatic disease. Simply put, we cannot conclude medically that it was the pesticide that caused the death of Genesis Petrillo. So, members of the jury, how would the pesticide gotten into the wine in the first place? Well, all the facts point to the fact that P&E Estates kept track of their use of pesticides. See, Ms. Austin Lewis came before you today and told you that starting in 2015, she personally oversaw that every member of the staff at P&E Estates was trained in the use and storage of pesticides. In fact, Ms. Lewis went out of her way and took personal steps to make sure that no pesticide got into the wine. Starting in 2016, she started roping off all the grapes that could be used with higher levels of pesticides and throwing them out so that those wouldn't be used for wine. You see, Ms. Lewis wasn't just making sure that the wine would be safe for people like Genesis Petrillo. She was making sure that it would be safe for every single customer of P&E Estates. Quite frankly, the facts don't point to that the pesticide could have gotten into the wine. Ms. Lewis and P&E Estates were just too vigilant in their practices. But this professionalism was apparent to people outside of P&E Estates as well. Blair Osborne came before you and told you that in her 82 weddings that she's had with P&E Estates, she's seen nothing but professionalism since that time. Now, members of the jury, considering that we're not really sure how Genesis Petrillo died, and we're not really sure how the pesticide would have gotten into the wine, what reason does the plaintiff have to come here today and accuse the defense of negligence per se? Well, for one, Casey Soto has no reason. She told you on cross-examination that she doesn't even really want to be here today. The only reason she's here is because she was forced by the plaintiff to testify in today's trial. Well, and I can tell you Dr. Kwan's reason for testifying today. As she stated on cross-examination, she is on a board that tries to ban the use of non-organic pesticides for growing and cultivating different plants. And this trial may help her in her endeavors to ban pesticides overall. Now, members of the jury, I want to take this time to remind you that the burden lies solely on the plaintiff today. They must prove that it was more likely than not, or by a preponderance of the evidence, that P&E Estates is liable of negligence per se. Now, members of the jury, when one question goes unanswered throughout today's trial, this may not tip the scales in favor of the defense. If 2 questions go unanswered, well, you start to question the story being told to you by the plaintiff. But members of the jury, if the plaintiff leaves 3 essential questions unanswered throughout the course of today's trial, then you cannot find that it was more likely than not that P&E Estates was negligent. Find P&E Estates not liable for negligence per se. Thank you.
Does the plaintiff wish to make a rebuttal?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
The answer to the defense's questions is in the bottle and it's in the blood. What caused Genesis Petrillo's death? It's obvious. You heard Dr. Kwan and Dr. Cannon both tell you that the most likely cause of death was poisoning by pesticides, specifically isofenthos organophosphate. And you heard them both admit that there is very little evidence supporting any of Dr. Cannon's other ideas. Their second question just doesn't add up. Find the defendant liable.
All right. Thank you, everybody. The matter is now submitted. I'm going to give myself and my scoring judge just a second to finish filling out our ballots. And then we'll come back and give you some brief feedback and we'll be done.
Do y'all mind putting your cameras on real quick so we can look at y'all for these rankings?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, so while we're doing that, I'm just going to introduce myself real quick. If I can figure out how to take care of this ballot.
Yeah, where's the submit button? The submit
you have to type in submit, I think.
Fancy. What's the ballot code? Oh, just kidding.
Sorry, give us just a second while we figure this out.
I submitted mine.
Okay, I'm still trying to figure out how.
You type in submit and then you type in yes.
Yes, but when I do that, it's not working. Go ahead and give your feedback. I'll figure this out.
Hi, my name is Caroline Capilli. I did mock trial at Baylor University in undergrad, and I'm a 2L at Notre Dame Law School now. So Josh and I actually competed together in undergrad. But overall, I thought this was really fun. I really miss mock trial. Haven't done it in a really long time. So obviously I'm doing my due diligence by giving back to the AMTA community. I know it's really hard being on Zoom, but I'm sure you've already gotten this feedback, but we can tell when y'all are reading. And I know it's super hard trying to steer away from that, but that's really, as the season goes on, I don't really know like what AMTA is planning to do, but as the season goes on, that's really what like distinguishes teams. So definitely like think about that moving forward. I know it's only October, so are these like your first tournaments via Zoom? Okay, great. So there's obviously like room for improvement. I just like overall, I mean, y'all did great for your first tournament. That's pretty impressive. I thought this case was really interesting. Are y'all allowed to use demos or no? Okay, so are y'all planning to in the future? I was just very confused in terms of like negligence per se. I'll talk about violating the statute, but I think it would be helpful to like have the statute up there when you're trying to explain that. And maybe y'all did that and I just missed it, or maybe you said it and I missed it. For
the witnesses, obviously, like you've probably heard this a million times, like staying in character on both sides and like not trying to be combative. I know some of y'all had issues with like cutting off other people. Just like be patient and probably just like wait a few seconds before you jump in. And if you're able to get off notes, I think that will just like make everything go a lot smoother. So.
Cool. So my name is Joshua Upham. I did AMTA mock trial for 3.5 years when I was an undergrad. I am now a 3L at Pepperdine School of Law, and I'm on the trial team there. I actually just finished competing at our trial team tournament for this year as of yesterday. So this has been a long weekend of mock trial for me, but no problem there. I just wanted to give y'all a couple of big picture feedbacks and then go and give a couple of specific, because I always find it really annoying when judges say something generally and I don't know if it applies to me or not. I think generally there were a lot of missed hearsay objections by both sides. I noticed a lot of times a reference would be referring to someone saying something. For example, there were some points that came up on the cross-examination of Dr. Cannon. And there were also some points where I thought there were hearsay objections to be made on the direct of Casey Soto. And probably there were more that I didn't write down. I was wondering, do y'all have a stipulation that says like certain statements come in and maybe that was a reason why you weren't making hearsay objections?
In the Casey Soto, those statements are generally considered to fall under party opponent, and in Dr. Cannon, it usually comes in under documents reviewed.
Okay. I understand that there may be exceptions, but I would probably consider making the objection at least once. If there's a stipulation on point, then it looks bad for you. But if it's a hearsay objection and it just happens to meet an exception, I think it's good to make the objection at least once. But I didn't count y'all down for not doing it. I thought that Mr. Mulvey, I thought that you had excellent objection form throughout. Your objections were very well stated. I didn't sustain a lot of them. Because I thought it didn't quite cross the border into character evidence, but I still think it was an objection that should have been made, and I think you did a good job with that. Lauren, I thought that you had an excellent cross-examination. I wrote that down specifically. It was very surgical, it was very in and out, and it was reactive to what the witness was saying, so I wanted to commend you for that. And Cole, I think, playing I think it was a witness named Blair. You had a very good character witness, and you did a really good job of keeping it up on cross-examination too, which is pretty hard to do. Just kind of going through some points on the main trial, I really liked the plaintiff's theme. You did a good job of weaving it in throughout, and I thought that just like the wording of the theme was actually pretty clever, and it made a lot of sense. The defense open I thought was good. I would have loved to see a little bit more of a story of what your version of events happen in the case were. I understand if you really only have 12 minutes for open and close, that's super short. So I think that may have been part of your calculus, but it is important because you're going to have a lot of judges who aren't familiar with the case. So I think if you could take an additional minute or two to just kind of flesh that story out, it certainly would have helped me in judging the round. On the direct of Soto, you talked about a storage barn leak, but I did not know what leaked in the barn, if that was wine or pesticides or what that is. So I would be sure to clarify that going forward. You also put up the wine label. I would put that up earlier when you're talking about the bottle of wine, because as it happened, it kind of just went up and then went back down. I would put that up earlier. I don't think it'll be any problem getting it in. And then it will really, it'll help make that point more effective. One thing that I think is true throughout, are you allowed to highlight and mark exhibits when they're being displayed to the court? Is there any rule on that? You're not allowed to?
I'm fairly certain you're not allowed to.
Yeah, that was my
Okay.
I think you just
Well,
have to call it a demonstrative and make note that they're making use of a demonstrative.
Okay. So this may be different from how we've been doing it on my law school team, but what we usually do is we'll put up the evidence and we'll put it into evidence. and then we'll have the witness make marks on it to highlight, like if you're referring to a certain line or a certain section of a document, then the annotated version will not be entered into evidence. It'll just be used for demonstrative value. So I would discuss that with your coaches, because on Zoom, it's really hard to tell where exactly someone is referring to. If you can't do that, you can at least zoom in on the document to the relevant part that you're looking at. And so I would at least do that, because sometimes I was trying to figure out where in the document you were referring to. And so it made me not able to pay as close of attention to your questions. I thought it's obviously a very expert heavy case. I thought for the most part, people did expert foundation pretty well, but I would go back and review 702. There were a couple times when expert witnesses had issues with like you didn't get out the methodology or a certain aspect of the qualification. And so there were some objections that if they had been made, I would have sustained on expert foundation. If you are allowed to conduct demonstrative exhibits, I would certainly do so for the expert witnesses. I was thinking, for example, on Mr. O'Keefe, you could just put up a slide that says, I wrote down that his two main conclusions were pesticides equals a risk and pesticides plus wine equals a health violation. I think that could be a really effective demonstrative, and probably there's versions of that that would be effective on the other side as well. For Dr. Kwan, she has two hypotheses on the direct examination. I would outline those a little bit better at the beginning of your direct and say, you know, I had two hypotheses. Say what they're in reference to, because I was a little bit confused as to what they were hypotheses about. It ended up making sense to me, but I thought you could have roadmapped that a little bit better. On which witness was this? So on the other thing on Dr. Kwan, I thought you did a really good job of defending your positions on cross-examination, but I would be a little bit careful of being an advocate witness. Towards the end of the cross, I thought you kind of crossed the line between, I think she was asking, I don't remember exactly what the question was, but something about if there was another explanation or something that oh no, it was whether you could be 100% certain or scientifically certain. When she follows up and asks the question, you're not 100% certain, I would just say yes, because I think you've already made your point. And then most of those comments apply to the rest of the witnesses. I thought that there were some statements from Blair Osborne about what Miss Martini said that sounded like hearsay to me. So I was looking for an objection there. Oh, and last of all, on the witness Austin Lewis, you had a very strong character, but it didn't stay strong throughout. You started off with a really strong character, and then it kind of faded a little bit as you went into the direct examination. So I would just choose one way, whether you want to have the strong character or not, and just stay consistent throughout, because that will help with credibility. And on the closes, the closes were both very good. The rebuttal was especially good, going back and being responsive to what the defendant or the defense counsel had said, but both of you could slow down a little. And by that, I don't mean that you were too fast, that it was hard to understand, but a lot of times closing is a really a time to be dramatic and really let your words sink in. So I didn't miss anything because of speed, but I thought it could have been more effective if you threw some kind of like dramatic pauses in there. And I should say, I realize that most of my feedback has been stuff you can improve on. I did think that both teams were very solid overall, but you've probably heard that tons and tons. You've probably had, you know, so many judges come in here and say, oh, you're better than the attorneys that I work with and all of that. But I think that's true, but I think that there are some things that you could improve on going forward. I understand you have another round coming up and probably will be using this case at tournaments later this year. So I hope that's helpful, and I'll stick around for a second if anyone wants to ask questions or clarify anything.
Yeah, thank you.
No problem.
Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to go find out how to submit this ballot with Elliot.